So the Obi Wan series has recently reached its conclusion, and a lot of people have had things to say about the show. I was debating for a while about whether or not I should even talk about it because the hatred that was thrown towards it was just really intense and gave me flashbacks to the sequel trilogy, and I was at a certain point saying I don't think I even want to talk about it. Given my history with the Star Wars fandom and responding to it, I wasn't really sure if I could go through that again, but then I remembered, Joe, you can't let the haters win. Some of the criticisms I think are somewhat justifiable, but a lot of the other criticisms I think are overblown and just unfounded. I could go into detail about how I think that's pretty stupid and uncalled for, but I'm not going to go into all that, at least not entirely. I'd say it's a flawed, but overall really solid and in many ways a beautiful piece of Star Wars entertainment that in many ways adds more layers of emotion and depth to the franchise as a whole, providing me with things that I always wanted to see in an Obi Wan Kenobi story, whether it be a show or a movie, and other things that I never knew that I thought that I wanted. To start it off, 10-year-old Leia meeting Obi Wan Kenobi, giving us more credibility and validity as to why she reached out to Obi-Wan in the original with her hologram message. Even though she's 10 years old, she's not a pushover. That fiery Skywalker blood is alive and well. I don't know the kid's name, but as you know, most of the time child actors aren't the best, and that's because they don't have the proper experience or the proper direction from a director. But in this case, she was phenomenal, and she felt like a very young Carrie Fisher. I think it's safe to say that Carrie Fisher was smiling down from heaven watching this little girl do her thing. I really like seeing the bond that she develops with Obi-Wan, or Ben as he calls himself, given that it's the alias since he doesn't want to draw attention from the Empire. And she says to him, that doesn't sound like a name that a Jedi would be called. Now it confirms why she named her son Ben Solo, Kylo Ren. I always kind of figured that was the case in the sequel trilogy when we first hear Han say the name Ben, but in this case with the show, it gives the sequel much more validity and credibility. I know some people are hoping for a retcon of the sequel trilogy. Sorry guys, but it ain't happening. She also proves to be very resourceful in how she manages to get the hangar door open for the rebels or the insurgents to escape from the hangar as Darth Vader and his forces are coming in. We even get a couple of scenes with her and her adoptive father, Bail Organa, once again reprised by Jimmy Smits, who is known to be a Star Wars fan in real life, and he was one of the fewer better parts of the prequel trilogy, especially in Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, seeing his bond and his trust of Obi Wan Kenobi. And just like in Rogue One, I was really happy to see that they got Jimmy Smits back. When he showed up, I lit up like a Christmas tree. A lot of that is due to me having seen him in the NYPD Blue TV show as Bobby Simone. He's great in that show, and here he's just as good. I could talk about each episode, but there's not a whole lot of episodes for me to cover, and not a whole lot of eventful stuff happens in here, as opposed to something like the Mandalorian seasons that we've gotten. This is a very condensed and tight series, and unfortunately, that's one of my biggest problems with the show, is that it's just too short. I think they could have benefited from having 8 or 9 episodes, or maybe even 10. Marvel has experienced a very similar thing with their shows like Falcon and Winter Soldier and Hawkeye. Not enough time for these shows to have some breathing room. They always do 6 episodes, and I get that you don't want to drag things on for too long, but there's nothing wrong with having more time to flesh certain things out. I think going forward, there's nothing wrong with having 10 episodes or 9 episodes a season. You can have that time to flesh certain things out and not feel so rushed to get to the finish line by the time the end shows up. Unfortunately, it gives us episodes that don't really have much to do with anything to begin with, like episode 4 or 3 or whatever, when they have to rescue Leia from Reva, who's being held hostage or prisoner. That show is just basically like a search and rescue mission episode. Nothing really major happens story-wise. We get one moment where Obi-Wan sees the body of a Jedi student or youngling trapped in that carbon freezer, put on water or something, and maybe a little bit of Vader force choking Reva. Not a whole lot of stuff happens in there, and I get that not every episode's gonna be as strong as others, and you're gonna have your highs and lows when you tell a story like this. I wouldn't say that episode's bad, just underwhelming. The best part of the show, though, is Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen, who returns as Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader. Ewan McGregor, I think, was the best actor in the prequel trilogy, and probably the best part of the prequel trilogy, despite the musical score by John Williams. I've always been open to the idea of Obi-Wan having his own story, whether it be streaming or a feature film, with Ewan McGregor returning, because I've always been kind of curious as to what exactly happened between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. I think other Star Wars fans, from what I can tell at least, were at least willing to try to be open to the idea of seeing a story like this. And I think in this case it was better suited for a streaming series because not everything has to be a feature film, especially with Boba Fett. Not to get into that too much, but I think in that case it was better off as a streaming series. Not every Star Wars character has a larger-than-life presence that requires a feature film like Luke Skywalker or Han Solo or Kylo Ren. Obi-Wan at this point, when we see him in the first episode, is a shell of who he used to be. A broken man, disconnected from the Force. Everything that he had and everything he knew is gone. But it's when Reva confronts him at that spaceport, he learns that Anakin's still alive. And I couldn't help but wonder, didn't he know that Anakin turned to the dark side and survived that burning? My guess is probably not. And when he saw him all burned up like that, he figured that, no, he's gonna die at some point anyway without medical attention, so I don't really need to worry about it. And also due to the fact that he cut himself off from the Force, probably adds another reason why. But his reaction to when he hears Reva telling him the truth, and when it cuts to Anakin inside that Bacta tank, who I'm assuming, in that scene at least, was played by Hayden Christensen, chills all over my body. I mean, holy crap. As much as I love the suit-up scene in Revenge of the Sith, this one was the best one. Like a full-fledged look of just how physically and emotionally and mentally broken Anakin Skywalker is at this point. He thinks that he's lost everything. He doesn't know about his kids, obviously. His wife is gone. His former master is now turned against him. And the show gives us a really good look of just how powerful and evil and scary Darth Vader really is. When he arrives on that planet looking for Obi-Wan, killing innocent civilians left and right. Force chokes, snapping somebody's neck with the Force, my jaw dropped to the floor. And I love their first lightsaber fight, where Obi-Wan's clearly rusty and hasn't had much time to use a lightsaber. Some people were disappointed by Obi-Wan's lack of skill in that fight. For the reasons I said earlier, he hasn't used a lightsaber in so long, so naturally he's gonna be really rusty with it. So you kind of have to give him some leeway there, and it almost kind of reminded me of the first fight between Batman and Bane in Dark Knight Rises. Bruce Wayne at that point hadn't been Batman for 8 years, and when he goes up against somebody like Bane, odds are it was not going to end well. Would have been kind of cool if Obi-Wan had a moment like Batman does where he goes, that would have been better. But the thing about Vader in this series is that he doesn't want to just kill Obi-Wan. He wants to torture this guy, make him feel the pain that he felt when he turned into the darkness and got burned up by that river, when he throws Obi-Wan into that fire, and Vader's just standing there taunting him. All I could think of was this one moment in Seinfeld with Kramer.
Yeah, look at you! Look at what you sunk to! Look at what you've become! Look in the mirror. You need help. I can't stand around here watching you destroy yourself. It's eating me up inside.
We also get to see Joel Edgerton return as Uncle Owen, who along with his wife Beru is raising Luke Skywalker, and how he blames Obi-Wan for the fall of Anakin Skywalker into the darkness, which gives more reason as to why Owen is very suspicious of Obi-Wan in A New Hope. That wizard's just a crazy old man. I wasn't that surprised that we saw Luke in this show, but I'm also glad that we really didn't get a whole lot of scenes with him, because we already know his story from the movies. There's really no need to have a full-fledged look at his childhood. That's the kind of stuff that you say for comics or novels. I would have been alright with it if we had one episode dedicated to him, because I think maybe in a way you could have made something compelling with him as a child. We've already had enough stuff with him in the movies. I think it's time to kind of let that go. Plus, we hadn't had a whole lot of time with Leia in the movies. I mean, obviously we do, but as far as character depth goes, there really wasn't a whole lot. Maybe to a certain degree there was in the sequel trilogy regarding her son Ben, but in this case, the show actually made up for that by showing us a young Leia, therefore adding more depths of character and emotion to her. And seeing Obi-Wan at this point hiding out in the Tatooine desert the way he does actually makes me appreciate Luke in The Last Jedi a lot more in hindsight. I know that's controversial considering how a lot of people don't like The Last Jedi and the way Luke was portrayed there, but Luke and Obi-Wan more or less go through the same thing. We know more in depth how certain things went down between Anakin and Obi-Wan than we do with Luke and Ben Solo in the sequel era. I'm sure other expanded universe lore will expand on that in the years to come. Basically, more or less the same thing happens with the two of them. Like in the moment where that former Jedi Force user confronts him in the desert begging him to come back to fight against the Inquisitors. He says to Obi-Wan, "What happened to you? You're just a shell of what you used to be. You're nothing like that I was told about." Just like Rey with Luke in The Last Jedi on Ahch-To. I know that's considered blasphemy by a lot of Star Wars fans, just like George Lucas said at one point in time. It's like poetry. It rhymes. And the Force mind-reading ability that Reva uses on that one actor who was one of the Eternals in Marvel's Eternals. I don't know the actor's name nor the character's name. He was alright in the show. He was basically a scam artist and tricked people into thinking that he was a Jedi when he really wasn't. And he turned out to be trustworthy in the end anyway when they had to escape from the Imperial Star Destroyer. But when Reva used that Force mind trick on her, I thought, That's the exact same thing that Kylo Ren used on Poe Dameron. Little things like that, along with other stuff in the Mandalorian seasons, which are references to sequel expanded universe lore. I'm still seeing people hoping and praying or believing that the sequels are going to be retconned. Guys, it's not happening. Get over it. But since Hayden Christensen has returned to the role of Anakin Skywalker, to be honest with you guys, I've always liked him as the character. I always thought he was a really good choice. Unfortunately, he was dealt a really bad hand by George Lucas, who didn't really know how to work with him properly or direct him the way that he should have been. His performance as Anakin Skywalker has been criticized so severely to the point where it's like, okay, guys, we get it. The whole I hate sand, it's rough and irritating and it gets everywhere. Yes, we know. We get it. I'll go into more detail about this at some point when I talk about the prequels, but Hayden Christensen's performance in Attack of the Clones is very hit and miss for me. Some scenes, I think he's legitimately fine in the role. Other times, not so much. Revenge of the Sith, I would say he's the most tolerable. Even though there's some moments where it's very reminiscent of Episode 2. In that movie, he's much better to deal with. And the scene that we get, or the flashback of the duel between him and Obi-Wan, the training duel, and I believe that scene takes place right before the events of Attack of the Clones. I kind of wish that they de-aged Hayden Christensen because his age, or his current age at least, was very noticeable in that scene. All that being said though, that whole sequence was fantastic. I think it was very much in vein, from what I understand at least, of how Anakin was portrayed in the Clone Wars. It felt more like the Clone Wars Anakin Skywalker. That's the Anakin Skywalker I wanted to see in the prequel trilogy. More of that and less of this.
I'm haunted by the kiss that you should never have given me.
Obi-Wan knows his former apprentice's mindset. That flashback sequence, intertwined with the current storyline, shows that Vader hasn't really changed much. Vader stopping that ship with the Force, just like Kylo Ren and Rey did in Rise of Skywalker, was jaw-dropping, but also considering Vader's foolhardiness, kind of hilarious, because it's only when the ship crashes that he sees the other take off, and by that point he's just too tired to even try to do it again. Arrogance is blinding you, Lord Vader. Let's talk about Reva. This was a huge bulk of the controversy, and a lot of people were up in arms about this, and unfortunately there was a lot of racist comments thrown towards the actress playing her. I don't know the actress's name. All I gotta say about that was uncalled for. Completely uncalled for. Basically, the story of Reva is that she was a youngling being trained at the Jedi Temple, and on the night of Order 66, she saw Anakin Skywalker, or Darth Vader, with her own eyes, murder her friends right in front of her. And I think it's safe to assume that he recruited her as an Inquisitor. And the Inquisitors are Darth Vader's personal guard, I suppose, as we saw in Jedi Fallen Order. And the little bits of Star Wars Rebels that I've started to watch, I actually started watching the show, and there's that one character voiced by Jason Isaacs in the show, and he appears in this series as well. I don't know if it's the same actor. Now I'm starting to catch on to other expanded universe stuff, because all I've done is the movie so far. But thanks to the show Rebels, it makes me appreciate the movies and the show's live action at least a lot more now. Reva basically is on a revenge mission to get the drop on Darth Vader and get payback for what he did to her the night of Order 66. It's not a traditional revenge plot. If that was the case, Reva would have experienced a crisis of conscience when she was interrogating Leia, or right before she would try to kill Vader. That's not exactly what happened. They saved that for when she almost kills Luke Skywalker. And while you could say her inclusion in the story was unnecessary and probably wouldn't have made much of a difference if she wasn't there, I think in a way it complements Obi-Wan's redemption, or his coming to terms with what he experienced all those years ago. Both him and Reva were done wrong by Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader. Reva, being at a young age when this happened, didn't know how to properly handle her emotions and was hell-bent on getting any kind of revenge that she wanted on him. And little details that I noticed about Reva chasing down Luke Skywalker in Beggar's Canyon, he doesn't see the lightsaber that she uses even one time, because the first time he sees a lightsaber is when Obi-Wan shows him in A New Hope, and I thought that this is where it could have easily broke canon, but thankfully, when she tripped him, he didn't have any time to see the lightsaber or notice any kind of unusual thing about the Force, so thankfully they could have easily slipped that up, but they didn't. And just like everybody else has pointed out, it's pretty stupid that Vader would just leave her for dead after stabbing her in the chest like that and not even bother to check to see if she actually is dead. Either way, we get to see her have her redemption arc, so it doesn't really matter to me. But then we get to the best scene in the show, when Obi-Wan and Vader have their final confrontation before we see them do it again in Episode 4, A New Hope. The lightsaber fight that we get almost seems like the rematch of the century. Vader gets the upper hand on Obi-Wan, forcing him down into a hole, and I thought for a second that Vader was going to say, "Now I have the high ground, Master." And Obi-Wan, just like in a similar fashion that Rey has in Rise of Skywalker, has a moment of inspiration, but in this case he remembers all the stuff that he's gone through and is able to push the rocks off of him and then gets the upper hand on him, which I was really, really enthralled by, and I thought, holy crap. This is unexpected, but hey, I think it's really cool. He cuts up Vader's chest armor, destroying his breathing apparatus using the same breathing effects that we hear in Return of the Jedi, and he cuts off part of Vader's helmet. And this is where we actually get to see Hayden Christensen underneath that mask. And it finally made me come to terms with something that I have wrestled with for years. I've never been able to really reconcile the fact that those two sets of the character are the exact same person. But seeing Hayden Christensen's Anakin Skywalker under that mask and hearing his voice melding perfectly with James Earl Jones' Darth Vader voice, I was finally able to say, okay, now I get it. I can see it. He really is Darth Vader. This whole exchange between Anakin and Obi-Wan is extremely heartbreaking. Obi-Wan is finally able to apologize to Anakin for what he's done and is able to finally let go of the past and become more of the optimistic Jedi that we all met in Episode 4. And Anakin's refusal to accept Obi-Wan's apology is able to help Obi-Wan in his recovery even further and provides more context and more of a reason as to why Obi-Wan calls him Darth, also recontextualizing what Luke said to Vader in Return of the Jedi, that my father is truly dead. One little gripe though, I wish that Obi-Wan said something like, "Anakin, it's not too late. We can fix this together." Because if you remember in Return of the Jedi when Luke says, "Come with me," Vader says, "Obi-Wan once thought as you do." I always thought, what does that mean? The prequels, we didn't really get that, but in the show, that was my biggest hope. I thought, okay, maybe we could finally get that answer. And I guess in a way that we did, because Obi-Wan apologized to him, but I really wish he said something like, "Anakin, it's not too late, we can fix this. Just come with me." Kind of like what Batman said to Jason Todd when he discovered that he was the Arkham Knight. In spite of all my gripes and problems with some of the episodes in the show, this scene really hit the mark for me. It made me say, yep, now you sold me. Now I understand why the show is necessary. Was it necessary? Maybe not overall. In the grander scheme of things in the Star Wars universe, it adds much more weight to the overall saga. And I know that George had no clue whether or not more stuff was going to come out of this when he made the original film back in the day. But in time, none of that really matters anymore because stuff like this makes it all the more worthwhile. And I really like seeing Obi-Wan saying hello there to a young Luke Skywalker, establishing their connection with each other even though there's no pre-established relationship, which is very much in line with the canon. Because from what we understand, Luke doesn't really know Obi-Wan that well. Because he says to 3PO, he lives out beyond the Dune Sea. Kind of a strange old hermit. Vader declaring his allegiance to Palpatine, who we see in a hologram message. Palpatine is able to sense that Anakin's feeling conflicted about Obi-Wan, but then decides, no, I only serve you, Master. Oh, and we get Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn as a Force ghost. I kind of figured that was going to happen, but still, that was really exciting to see. I'm not really a fan of Qui-Gon in Phantom Menace, but again, little things like that, it's worth it for me. Since this is not written and directed by George Lucas, it's all for the better for me. Not meaning any disrespect to George, but yeah, I'll save that for a much later time. Overall, despite being a flawed show in some ways, it's a very beautiful piece of Star Wars media and storytelling art as far as I'm concerned, adding more layers of emotion to Obi-Wan, Darth Vader, and Princess Leia. Would I want to see a second season? No, I think that this one's just enough for me. But if they decide to do a season 2, we'll see what happens. When it comes to Star Wars, despite what many fans will say, how it should never have been made, it's ruining Star Wars, blah blah blah, I'm always going to give a new Star Wars movie or show a benefit of the doubt, as we all should. There might be some breaks here and there with the movies and the shows, but it's always going to be around, and we just have to come to terms with it. And if you don't want to watch them, don't watch them. You're not doing anybody any good by complaining about it. Those are my thoughts on the show Obi-Wan. Thank you guys for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on the series, and I'll see you guys in the next one.